Hi everyone, my name is Julia. I'm a 28-year-old grad student living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I usually make videos about home decor, but today I wanted to make a video about my other favorite hobby, which is reading. I'm going to be ranking every single book I read in 2025 from worst to best. At the beginning of the year, I made a goal of reading 25 books, which was more than I've been reading for the past few years. So I thought it was a little bit of a stretch, but then I just ended up getting super obsessed with reading, and I ended up reading 64 books, which is more than I've ever read before. And the biggest thing that got me reading so much more than normal was that for each book that I read, I would kind of double up on both a physical book and an audiobook. Sometimes this involved double buying the book. A lot of times I tried to get the audiobook through Libby for free. I also used a service called Everend, which is a lot better of a deal than Audible, so you can get 3 books for $15 instead of 1. I'm sure a lot of people would just not want to double up like this, but for me, it was amazing because I really prefer reading one book at a time and getting totally immersed in it. And I'm a little bit of a slow reader when it comes to physical books. So having the option to listen to the audiobook while cleaning or going for a walk or something just made me get so much more into reading than normal. And I had the best time with books this year. And I'm really excited to share what I read. Without further ado, let's get started on the ranking. I'm gonna begin with the worst books of the year. So I kind of have 2 books that were major letdowns for me. Most of the books I read I really did like, but these 2 I'm starting with I was not a fan of. So the first one was Dust Storm by Maggie Gates. This is a romance. It's kind of like a cowboy meets city girl romance. I will say I don't read a ton of romance, but I do enjoy love stories. I thought it would be a fun, light read, and I'd heard good things about it. But I was not able to finish this book. This is the only DNF on this list. I just could not do it. I found the male main character really misogynistic and just to be an asshole. He kept calling the female character princess, and mind you, they literally just met each other through a professional relationship, and I found that super condescending. He described the female main character as having F-me legs. What does that even mean? I just thought that was terrible writing and I found it kind of gross. There's another scene where he chastises his employees for harassing the female main character, and his argument is really that she is special to him, so they shouldn't harass her, not just that they shouldn't harass all women. So I just thought this book was really behind on the times. Also, the female main character is super mean to children, and the characters also seem like they've known each other forever when they literally just met. So I honestly hated this book. I'm so sorry to Maggie Gates, but I could not do it. I read maybe about a third of it actually, and then I just could not keep doing it. So that was my worst book of the year. I gave it 1 star. The second worst book of the year for me, I did finish and I gave 2 stars. So it was definitely a little better than the previous one. So this was Seduction Theory by Emily Adrian. I thought this sounded really interesting from the premise. So it's about a marriage between 2 professors. One of them has an affair, and then the other one has this MFA student who finds out about the affair and then uses it as the plot for her MFA thesis. I thought this sounded super interesting, but it turns out that is the entire plot. The whole plot was given away on the back cover. There really wasn't anything more to the story. I also just don't think I'm the biggest fan of novels about MFA programs. It kind of feels like to me like these writers went and got their MFA and then they got writer's block and couldn't think of another setting. I mean, it can be done well for sure, but I just didn't think it was here. I will say though that the reason that this was 2 stars and the reason that I probably finished it, first of all, it's really short, but also the individual sentences were quite beautiful. I definitely do think this author has talent for writing, but I just think this particular book was a miss. But I wouldn't be opposed to reading something else by her. So those were the only 2 that I strongly disliked. Now we're moving on to books that were okay, but I have some notes or some complaints, but they're not bad books. I still enjoyed the books in this category. First up, we have Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. Now, if you're familiar with the Fourth Wing series, it is a romantasy series about a 20-year-old girl named Violet who attends a war college and becomes a dragon rider. You'll see I read the first 3 books in the series this year, which is all that's out right now. I don't normally read fantasy, but a friend of mine recommended these to me and I did have fun reading them. This is the third book and I thought it was the worst of the three that were out so far. I just found the first half really slow. The pacing was off for me. It did get a lot better in the second half, but I'm kind of concerned about how much of a plan the author has for the rest of the series, but it was still fun reading about the characters. Another thing that I didn't love is that the majority of the book is told through the female main character's point of view, but then there's a few random chapters that are from the male main character's point of view. That just felt kind of lazy to me. Why do we need his point of view? Why can't we find this information out through the female main character? His voice sounded exactly the same as hers, so I didn't really believe that it was him. This was not my favorite of the series. Now, the next one is My Cat is Such a Weirdo by Tamako Tamagoyama, and translated by Alina Ishikawa. And this book is a collection of comics about the author's cats. It is very endearing. I did enjoy reading it, but I was kind of expecting that there would be some kind of narrative to it, and it was kind of just random cartoons cobbled together. Another thing is that it is a translated work, so I think it's possible something was lost in translation there. I would say it was cute, but not super memorable. The next one was Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was my first Emily Henry book. The plot of the book is that a romance writer and then like a serious fiction or historical fiction writer meet in a beach town, and they both kind of have writer's block. So to help each other get out of their writing slumps, they decide that they're each going to write a book in the other one's genre. So it's a fun premise, and I did enjoy reading it, but the story just didn't feel totally cohesive. Some of the scenes just felt random to me. Also just didn't like the male main character that much, or at least he didn't seem ready for a serious relationship. The progress of their romance felt a little bit forced to me. Another thing I'll say is that there are different endings for the American and the British version, I found out, and I like the British ending a lot more, but I won't spoil what either of those are. The next book was Mornings Without Me by Mayumi Inaba and translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. This is a memoir by a Japanese writer chronicling her life alongside her cat, Mi. It was a really beautiful story. Clearly this cat was the love of the author's life, which I super related to as someone who's mega obsessed with my cats. Part of why I didn't totally enjoy it though was there's very intense descriptions of the cat dying, which is just not something that I want to read. I've also seen strong reactions to the care or sort of the lack of care that Inaba provided to her cat. And a lot of the decisions she makes in raising her cat are kind of shocking to an American reader in 2025. But the book is set in Japan 30 to 50 years ago, and you can even tell from reading it that the author didn't know a lot of people with cats. She had a really hard time even finding an apartment that would allow her to have a cat. I don't think there was a lot of support for people with pets. So although some of her decisions are surprising to us, I feel like she was doing the best that she could with the cat. But this book was a little bit jarring, I will say. So the next one was Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. You'll see that I read a lot of TJR this year, and I really like her, but this was my least favorite of the ones I read. So the premise is that we have a tennis star who decides to come out of retirement so that she can reclaim a record that someone else just took from her. And it is very well written and enjoyable to read, but I did just think that compared to Taylor Jenkins Reid's other books, I thought the characters were kind of flat and the plot was predictable. There's a little bit of a romance in the book, and that just felt totally like an afterthought to me. I did really like the tennis, and I'm not a sports person, but her writing about the competitive tennis was really fun to read. And so I especially think if you enjoy that, you might still like this book, but it wasn't a standout for me. Next up is Under the Banner of Heaven by Jon Krakauer. So this is a history of violence in the Mormon fundamentalist church. It opens up with the murder of a 24-year-old woman and her baby by her brothers-in-law, who received a revelation from God that they should murder her for kind of going against what they wanted to do in the church. So it's a fascinating topic. I was really excited to read it, especially because I'd read other Krakauer before, which you'll see later. But this book It took me weeks to read, and it's not that long. I just found it really challenging, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I definitely think I learned a lot by reading it, and I do think it's worth reading books that challenge you. But there were just like a lot of names and dates. It was very much a history book, and I found it very hard to keep track of everything. Partly this is because a lot of the people in the book were polygamists and had like tons and tons of wives and children. So there were just like so many names. But it's still a fascinating topic and it's very well researched. And maybe if you're more into history, you won't find it so difficult, but I don't read a lot of books that have this many names and dates, so it's a bit much for me. Next we have Isaac's Song by Daniel Black. This is the story of a young Black man coming to terms with his queer identity in the 1980s. This is a really beautiful story, and I liked that it was a different perspective for me. I will say that the narrative structure was a little bit confusing to me. There were times when I was just not totally sure what was going on, or I felt like there was some information missing. I later found out that this book is kind of a companion to another book called Don't Cry for Me, which is maybe why I felt like there was something missing. It was a little weird because I got this book from Book of the Month and there was no indication that it was a sequel. As a standalone, it was so-so, but I could see maybe it being 4 or 5 stars if I had the context of the first book. And I did really like this character and find his point of view super interesting. Next we have It's Different This Time by Joss Richard. Now, this is a romance, and it's kind of a second chance at romance book. So this woman finds out that she and her former roommate slash best friend, who she's since become estranged from, have inherited the brownstone where they used to live together and rent in New York City. Their landlord left it to them in his will. And so they both end up moving into the brownstone together and kind of reconnect and revisit their old feelings. So this was just exactly what I was in the mood for when I read it. It's very much like a fall vibes book, and I read it in October, and I was just looking for something light and fun. The dual timelines in the book were done really well because it kind of goes back and forth between when they first lived together and then the present. And the pacing was really good too. The only reason it didn't rank higher is just because it's very predictable and kind of full of tropes, which I think a lot of people do not mind, but it just probably was never going to be a top book for me, but it did really scratch a certain itch, and I do recommend it if you like reading romances. Now we're kind of moving on. We're going from okay to good. So these books were good, in my opinion. So first we have Wicked by Gregory Maguire. I'm sure everyone has heard of this story because this movie is all over the place, so I'm not really gonna explain the plot. I was kind of nervous to read it because I liked the musical and the movie so much, and then the book really does have mixed reviews. My fiance gave it to me for Christmas last year, so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna give it a chance, and I really enjoyed it a lot more than I expected. It was super fun to see where these beloved characters originated, and I think also the characters in the book were a lot more complex than the ones in the musical and movie, which makes sense. They're very morally ambiguous, which is something I tend to really like in books, and the writing was very funny and unique, very strange in certain points, but I did get a kick out of it. My biggest criticism was just that the pacing was not great. There were sections that just really dragged on, but this book was definitely interesting, and I think if you're a fan of Wicked, you might enjoy reading it. Next up we have Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So this is the second book in the Fourth Wing series, and I previously mentioned the third book. This one, it was really fun to be back with the characters from the first book, and there were a lot of very mind-blowing reveals that happened in this one, so it was pretty fun, but it was too long. It did not need to be 600 pages, and it did take me quite a bit longer to read both the second and third one than the first one, and you'll see that I did like the first one a lot more. Next we have Liquid, a Love Story by Mariam Rahmani. So this is a story of an Iranian Indian English PhD graduate who is struggling with her employment and her love life. So she decides that she's going to go on 100 first dates over the course of a summer, and then that plan ultimately gets interrupted by a family emergency that brings her to Tehran. So this writing was really smart, and I also enjoyed that the main character was bisexual, but it just wasn't a super big theme of the book. That was just cool to see. And this book explores a lot of really cool themes, so gender, sexual and cultural identity. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think if you look on like Goodreads, this book has pretty poor reviews. I think that this is partially due to poor marketing. So if you look at the cover of this book, it totally looks like kind of a light romance. And that is not what it is. It is definitely an eggheady book. And the love story is really kind of secondary. So I would say that if you liked The Idiot by Elif Batuman, I would strongly recommend this book. But yeah, it's really not a romance. So next up we have We'll Prescribe You a Cat by Siu Ishida and translated by E. Madison Shimoda. So this is kind of a magical realism book set in Japan, and it's a story about a mysterious clinic that prescribes people cats for their ailments. And it goes through and we have a bunch of different characters who are all prescribed different cats. And this book is just very charming. I read this in January of last year and it just felt like a warm hug. I think it's perfect for cat lovers and it's just a very easy, quick read. Next up, we have Among Friends by Hal Ebbett. This is a novel about two families who have been friends for decades. The husbands in the families were friends in college, and this friendship is greatly threatened when one of the characters commits an unspeakable act, and then we kind of get to see how all of the characters react to this. So I got this book from Book of the Month, and I usually will only read books that have at least kind of good reviews on Goodreads, like maybe, you know, a 3.5 or more. But something that was kind of fun about doing Book of the Month, which I only did for a few months, was that I didn't get to see the reviews ahead of time. So I would just kind of go into it blind. And I realized that there were some books I really liked that other people didn't, which made me realize I probably shouldn't view the reviews as gospel, and the reverse of course is true. So this is an example. This book has less than 3 stars on Goodreads, and I'm not really sure why other people didn't like it. It does deal with difficult topics such as sexual assault, which is maybe a little bit of a spoiler, but I think it's worth knowing going into it. But I thought it was really interesting. I would almost kind of classify it as psychological fiction because we really get inside the characters' heads, and some of the characters are definitely questionable people. Next up, we have Bunny by Mona Awad. So the plot of this book is that an MFA student becomes involved with this creepy clique of girls in her program who call each other Bunny. And I know I said I wasn't the biggest fan of MFA stories, and I felt that a little bit here, but I think this book was a lot more interesting and unique than the other one I mentioned. So I was definitely drawn to this because I just love dark stories about female friend groups like Mean Girls, Heathers, I'm In, Sign Me Up. So I will say at first the writing of this book kind of felt almost like too easy, like it was young adult or something. But then as the book progressed, I felt like I really came to understand the author's vision, and I think it was very well executed. I just can't even explain this book without giving stuff away. Oh, there's my cat, Rory. But yeah, it's definitely like a weird girl book. You're in for some weird stuff if you read this one, but I had fun. Next up, we have Funny Story by Emily Henry. The premise of this book is that the main character's fiance leaves her for his childhood best friend. And so then she needs somewhere to live, and she ends up moving in with her ex-fiance's new girlfriend's ex-boyfriend. So they're kind of going through this shock together that they've both just been suddenly dumped. And this book was just very funny, sweet, and relatable. I definitely liked it more than Beach Read. I will say that it kind of triggered my anxious attachment. The characters definitely have some issues, which isn't a bad thing, but I was just like, whoa, too close to home on this one. Next up, we have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is a classic. It was published in 1932, and I've just seen so many references to it that I was like, okay, I need to actually see what this is about. And I actually read it kind of alongside 1984 by George Orwell, which I really recommend because they're just really interesting to look at in tandem because they present two kind of alternate dystopias, and they're both referenced a lot and inspired a lot of other sci-fi and dystopian novels. This is kind of about a hedonistic dystopian society So they really place comfort above all else, and we kind of get to see what is lost when that's done. It also kind of involves genetic engineering, which was very prescient for 1932. And this was just really interesting to read. I definitely recommend it. I mean, I think it's just one of those books that whether you enjoyed it or not while you're reading it, you're kind of glad you read it later because you just understand what people are talking about. Next up, we have Life's Edge by Carl Zimmer. So this is a nonfiction book that just kind of explores the question of what it means to be alive. And it makes you realize that the answer to that is not totally obvious. Like, yes, humans are alive, pets are alive, plants are alive, and then, you know, a brick is not alive. But there's things in between where it's like, I don't know, like, are viruses alive? Are organoids alive? So this was really fascinating. I will say some of the science took me a little while to try to understand, and I kept reading it before bed, and I would sort of have to reread passages over and over again. But this is super interesting, especially if you like science writing. It's really well done. So the next one is The Bright Years by Sarah Damoff. This is a book about a couple whose relationship is thrown off course by the revelation of a big secret, as well as alcohol addiction. And I read this book in like 2 days. I really enjoyed it. It's a quick read, but I will just say that it kind of covers the characters' whole lives, and it's a really short book, so it just didn't go into as much depth as I would have wanted. I honestly just wish it was longer. I feel like that would have been really fun if it delved deeper into sort of all the details of the characters. The next book is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is about a depressed young woman who embarks on a journey to spend a year sleeping. Obviously, she's not like literally asleep the entire year, but she's like laying on the couch and like a cocktail of drugs, like maybe watching some movies, but she is not doing much for like a whole year. My friend recommended this book to me because I told her that I like books where nothing happens. And so that's kind of true of this book, but the writing is excellent. It's so weird. There's a lot of descriptions of disgusting things, which might not be for everyone, but I really loved it. My main criticism of this book, though, is that the narrator is quite problematic, and it's difficult to tell whether the author kind of shares her views or not. And I just feel like there were things in here that did not serve the story that were ultimately like potentially very offensive. For example, I really did not like the portrayal of Asian men in this book, and I really could have done without the sort of stereotypes that she included. So yeah, not too sure about that. So do what you will with that. Next we have The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins. So this is a science book. It was published in 1976, and the kind of thesis of the book is that the gene is the unit of natural selection rather than an individual organism. The writing was very convincing, and there were a lot of like really interesting examples from different animal populations. I will say that it's kind of redundant, so there's just a lot of repeated examples, which is great in terms of making a scientific argument, but it did make it a little bit less enjoyable to read because I was just like, okay, like I kind of get the point. I think if you are interested in science writing, biology, like this is a classic. Next, we have 1984 by George Orwell, which I mentioned before, kind of read along with Brave New World. So this was originally published in 1949 about a man who tries to resist his fascist government. So I really think everyone should read this, especially if you're a fan of sci-fi and dystopian novels. Also, in 2025, it is shocking to see kind of how much Orwell predicted so many years ago. Like, he even kind of predicted AI, which is crazy. So I definitely think this is worth the read. I will say the pacing of the book is difficult. It definitely drags on at certain points, and it's not entirely fun to read, but for me, it was very worth it, and the ideas in it are just so fascinating. So now we're moving on from books that were good to books that were very good. The first one in this category is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. So this is Joan Didion's memoir about the loss of her husband. It's very well written. I will say that this was just difficult to read. So her relationship with her husband just sounds so beautiful. It sounds like they were the best friends in the world. and like true kindred spirits and soulmates. And so reading about the loss of it was just absolutely crushing. It made me kind of have intrusive thoughts about losing my own fiance, and I would just kind of have to put it down and be like, okay, like enough. But it's a really fantastic book. And I also think if you're dealing with grief, you might find comfort in it as well. Great book, very hard to read. Next we have Foster by Claire Keegan. So this is an Irish novella about a child who goes to live with relatives for a while, and she experiences a love and a care from these relatives that she did not get from her parents. This book was just very touching and sad and well written. I think writing short stories or novellas or just short books, it is hard to get in a satisfying story in that few words. I think this was very well done, and it literally only would take a few hours to read, so I definitely recommend that one. Next up we have Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers. So this is a story of 3 adult sisters navigating the loss of their 4th sister who passed away. They also all have their own distinct experiences with addiction. This was a very heart-wrenching story, and I really connected with the characters, and the pacing in this was excellent. The information was just kind of revealed in a way that made me want to keep reading. Next we have Gold Dust Woman by Stephen Davis. So this is a biography of Stevie Nicks. I was inspired to read this after I read Daisy Jones and the Six, which is loosely based on Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac. I found it very interesting. It kind of led me into a deep obsession with Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac, and that was fun too because my dad is a big fan, so we got to talk about that. It really made me feel a kinship with Stevie. I just kind of adore her, and it's clear that the author admires her as well, and I liked that he did not go easy on Lindsey Buckingham. Next up we have Crossroads by Jonathan Franzen. This is a novel about a pastor's family in 1970s Chicago. So one of the central conflicts is that the pastor used to lead the youth group at his church, but he kind of got kicked out. And then after he got kicked out, his own kids decided to join, and he feels very betrayed by this. This is where the title of the book comes from. The youth group is called Crossroads. The characters were very morally ambiguous, which, like I said before, I enjoyed. And they just really felt like real people to me. The writing was great. It had this great American novel kind of feeling. And it was also really interesting. All the characters in this one family kind of developed their own religious and political views throughout the novel, which I enjoyed. It was a little bit long. It was like 600 pages, but I did really like it. The next one is Endling by Maria Reva. This book is set in Ukraine in 2022. It's about these women who are employed at a marriage agency in Ukraine, which kind of sets up Ukrainian women with foreign visitors. And one of the women decides that she wants to kidnap a bunch of the foreign bachelors to make a political statement. Now, this plan kind of goes awry when Russia invades Ukraine. It's just this crazy situation that Maria Reva has created. And she also kind of explores the morality of profiting off of writing about Ukraine while she's safe in Canada. Because I believe the author immigrated from Ukraine to Canada when she was a little girl. This book was like unlike anything else I've read. I guess it's mostly fiction, but there's a little bit of almost memoir in it. I really like that I was able to learn about real world issues like the Russia-Ukraine war, but also enjoy this wacky and humorous story. So I definitely do recommend this one. So next up we have A Man Called Uwe by Frederick Bachman. This is a very popular book. It's about a grumpy man in his late 50s who kind of gets a second chance at life when he becomes friends with his neighbors. So a very heartwarming premise. I found Uwe like so lovable. I think he was very autistic coded because he really relies on rules and routines and has a lot of discomfort with change. And he also has a lot of challenges connecting with other people. So he really reminded me both of myself and other people in my life. And I just really loved him. I will say like it was a little bit meandering in certain places and it felt a little bit more like a Disney movie than real life, but it was super sweet. Definitely like a cozy read. So next we have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. So finally we've gotten to the first book in the series. And like I said before, I don't normally go for fantasy, partly because I just get impatient with the world building and having to learn all of the magic systems and things like that. This book is just really easy to get into. The magic system and stuff is just very uncomplicated. And I really did identify with Violet, the main character. So she actually has Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which the real author has, so I'm sure that was her inspiration for it. But that kind of puts her at a physical disadvantage compared to a lot of her peers in this war college. And everyone kind of thinks that she's not going to make it because she's weak, but she ends up finding her own way to do things and kind of outsmarting them. And I just really loved this character, and seeing a fantasy heroine with a real life disability like that. I also really like the dragons, which I wasn't expecting, just not being a huge fantasy person, but Violet's connection with her dragons really kind of reminded me of my connection with my cats. So that was very heartwarming. I will say that, I mean, this is a romantasy, so the romance is a big part of it. I'm not obsessed with the romance. I kind of think they have an unhealthy relationship. And I also just think that Xaden is much more of a flat character than Violet. So that's my hot take on Fourth Wing. But I had fun. I'm definitely glad I stepped out of my comfort zone a little bit and like tried a different genre. Next we have Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. The premise of this book is that the narrator and her husband are both English professors at an elite college, and the husband is facing accusations of inappropriate behavior from former students. So the female professor is kind of navigating that, and then she also herself becomes obsessed with this other professor who's married. I tore through this book in one day. The writing was just so intelligent and funny and full of literary references. I found the characters fascinating. This book just gripped me. The reason that it's maybe not higher on the list is that I cannot decide what I think about the ending. I feel like that did take it down a notch for me. So if you read this, I'd be curious to see what you think about that. This is definitely a weird girl book as well. And if you like dark academia, dry humor, this would be for you. Next we have Margot's Got Money Troubles by Rufi Thorpe. So the premise of this is that a community college student becomes pregnant with her professor's baby after they have very short, obviously inappropriate affair. And so then she's finding that she has no money and she's pregnant and she's like 19 or 20. And so she decides to join OnlyFans to make money. I wasn't expecting to love this so much. I picked it up pretty randomly, but Rufi Thorpe's writing is so good. There were just a lot of sentences that I like laughed out loud reading, where I was just like, how do you even think of this? Like, this is so funny. And I think something that was really impressive about this book was that it managed to be very goofy and ridiculous while also making serious points about the stigma of sex work and the burden of being a mother in America. So that was pretty cool. I will say that it has kind of an experimental component, which is that it switches between first and third person. And I didn't notice it that much. It didn't impede my experience, but I also don't really get why she did that or if I'm missing something. But to me, that just felt strange. Next up, we've got The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book was literally everywhere a few years ago. It's old news for sure, but I just got to it this year. The premise is that a young journalist gets to interview a retired Hollywood star, and the star, Evelyn Hugo, is definitely inspired by Elizabeth Taylor. So it's kind of centered around, she had 7 different marriages. But the thing that I didn't know going into this is that this is actually like a beautiful queer love story. Like it's not really about the husbands. Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing just makes you feel like you're watching a movie. So it's really nothing fancy or flowery, but the language is just very precise and exactly conveys the story. She's efficient with her word choice, and I just think she has kind of a rare gift. So next up, we have The Favorites by Lane Fargo. This is a story of this couple who escapes poverty by becoming Olympic ice skaters. And it's done in a documentary style where you kind of have interviews with different characters and you know that something terrible happened in their career, but you don't really know exactly what. So there's like a lot of intrigue, and it really just feels like you're watching the movie. I didn't even feel like I was reading a book, and I was just addicted to this. I could not put it down. The audiobook was also incredible. I was going back and forth, like I mentioned, and it's very similar to Taylor Jenkins Reid's style, and the author even cited TJR as a major inspiration. And I actually read this before I'd read any Taylor Jenkins Reid. And so then I was like, oh, okay, like I liked this, like I should probably try the person's work who inspired this. I think what made it a little bit different from TJR is just, it was kind of longer and more fleshed out than TJR's work, which I liked. But then I guess my one criticism of it is that it felt like every crazy thing that could happen did happen. So it was very much almost like Grey's Anatomy in that kind of way, but it was fun. It was just like a very addictive, cannot put down kind of book. So next we have The God of the Woods by Liz Moore. This is also everywhere. And I saw recently that Taylor Swift was listening to it in her recent docuseries, and now the book sales have gone up again. It's basically a literary mystery about a child who goes missing at summer camp and her brother who also went missing 14 years earlier. The writing in this book was really wonderful, and I love the characters as well. I was just very hooked, and I had so much fun trying to guess what happened to the kids. I will say I did not like the ending, and people are very conflicted about this, but that still didn't take away too much from the overall experience of reading the book. And I recommended this to my mom, and she loved it too. So next we're moving from the very good to the great category. The first book we have here is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the story of a rock band in the 1970s who split up at the height of their popularity, and we don't really know what happened. And it's in an interview documentary style. This was probably one of the big inspirations for The Favorites, which I just talked about. TJR said that she was inspired by Fleetwood Mac and the drama that they had while making the Rumors album. This book was fantastic. I read it in like 2 days. I remember my fiance's parents were visiting, and the whole time I was hanging out with them, I just could not stop thinking about this book. I wanted to get back to it. No offense to them. After reading this, I then fell into this like very deep Stevie Nicks obsession. Next up is another book by the same author, Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. So this is her newest one, and it's about a female astronaut in the 1980s who enters a secret relationship with another female astronaut, and they're both kind of putting their NASA careers at risk by doing this. I kind of woke up in the middle of the night and I was just thinking about this book, and it was like 4 a.m. and I just got up and finished it because I could not stop thinking about it. I think you can really see Taylor Jenkins Reid's growth as an author in this book. She clearly put so much research into this book, and there's just so much heart there. I really think she's getting better and better, and I was a big fan of this one. Next we have Clean by Alia Trabuco Serran, translated by Sophie Hughes. This is about a maid turned nanny in Chile, and she's giving basically a deposition after the 7-year-old child that she took care of dies. And we essentially don't know what really happened to this little girl. I would call this like a literary thriller. The writing was very sharp and the pacing was just excellent. I wanted to know so badly what happened to the girl. And I found the sort of morally ambiguous characters really fascinating. It was a really interesting exploration of class and caregiving relationships. So next up is The Sun Was Electric Light by Rachel Morton. So this is about a woman named Ruth who is just very depressed and aimless in her life. So she decides to pick up her life from New York and move to Guatemala without a job. And while she's in Guatemala, she becomes deeply intertwined with these two very different women. I read this book in like a day or two, and I was just stunned by it. The writing was just gorgeous, and Morton really paints this portrait of depression that, from personal experience, it was just very spot on. And I liked that it explored queer relationships without it being a huge question of identity. It's very sad, but this was really beautiful. Next up is Overcoming Unwanted Intrusive Thoughts by Sally M. Winston. So this is a book to help manage OCD, which I have. That's why I read it. And it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't think there's too much to say about this, but I found it really helpful, and I would recommend it to you if you struggle with intrusive thoughts. Next up, kind of on a similar vein, is Self-Care for Autistic People by Megan Anna Neff. This is a very accessible little book full of self-care strategies for autistic folks. Dr. Megan Neff is the host of one of my favorite podcasts, which is called Divergent Conversations. And I think this book is another great contribution of hers to the neurodivergent community. I found it personally helpful. I was diagnosed with autism in 2024. But I honestly recommend it for anyone that just struggles with sensory issues, because That's something that you won't see a lot of in traditional self-care books, and there's still a lot of good tips for emotional regulation in this book. So I definitely don't think you need to be diagnosed as autistic to get something out of it. Also, if you just have people in your life that you'd like to understand better, it's great. It's very short. You can read particular sections that feel relevant. Next up is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. This is about an older woman who lost her son in a tragic accident many years ago, although she doesn't really know what happened. And she becomes friends with this octopus at the aquarium where she works. And he kind of helps her understand the death of her son. And this book sounds like such a crazy and silly premise, but it is so heartwarming and well written, and just like kind of a comfort read and very unique. Highly recommend. Next is The Overstory by Richard Powers. This is a novel that interweaves several different characters and their relationships to trees and forests, and then eventually the stories sort of converge and you see the connection. And I think this is kind of great American novel vibes as well. I really identify with Powers' characters. A lot of them are activists, a lot of them are academics, and they're very idealistic. And they're also very imperfect and lovable. And reading this made me feel like I was waking up from a daze. Why haven't I been paying attention to the trees? Why haven't I been worried about them? This is a great one. It's a very compelling and satisfying novel. Next is Driven to Distraction by Edward M. Hollowell and John J. Rady. So this is an ADHD book, which, as you may guess, I also have. It was actually published in 1992. And surprisingly, it's just still really holds up and is on the nose in 2025. They refer to it as ADD in the book because that was what it was called at the time. Essentially, this book just shows all of the different ways that ADHD can manifest and how it can look really different in different folks. I just think it does a great job destigmatizing it and offering advice for folks that have ADHD. I just felt very seen by it. I honestly recommend it to anyone, even if you don't have ADHD, just because I think everyone understanding it better would be a service to society, especially people who are teachers or who work with kids. Next, we have Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howarth. This is about a girl named Lucy who is a teenager in small town Ireland in the 1990s, and she finds herself becoming very infatuated with her friend Susanna. This was just a really fascinating exploration of queer identity in a conservative small town. And this book just had me hooked. I read it in like a day or two. It was really heart-wrenching. Big recommend there. Next up is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. The premise of this is that this writer named Athena Liu suddenly dies, and she's in the middle of a big manuscript. Her friend kind of takes the manuscript, adds her own spin to it, and then ultimately sells it as her own work. And this friend also is not Asian, and she low-key pretends to be Asian. So this was just a wild ride and very well executed. It's like maximum cringy because the protagonist is just descending into madness, going into a grave of her own making. Crazy, but I just could not look away. There were a lot of morally ambiguous characters. I mean, I do think the main character was pretty morally not good, but a lot of the other characters, you're like, I don't know. And the writing is just so smart and funny, and I really enjoyed the literary and pop culture references. I know that R.F. Kuang is mostly a fantasy writer, and so I'm sure her other books are very different, but this book just showed me that she's an incredible writer, so I would love to try some of her other stuff. Next is Milk-Fed by Melissa Broder. This is about a liberal, not so religious Jewish woman who falls in love with an Orthodox Jewish woman who's definitely not supposed to be gay, according to her family. This book swallowed me whole. I was just consumed by it, and I felt like I was inside of their love affair. This book also just has a lot of like very gross and indulgent descriptions of both food and sex that I just thought were so well written and visceral, and it really played with my emotions. Next, we have Immune by Philip Detmer. This is a science book. It explains how the immune system works in layperson's language and also has absolutely incredible illustrations. I read this kind of for work. I'm working on an autoimmune disease project. I wanted to understand the immune system better. But I actually found, even though I was like reading it for work, I had such a good time. So I think if you like reading science books or you want to learn more about immunology but you don't really know where to start, this book's awesome. Next is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is a novella set in 1980s small town Ireland, and it tells the story of a coal merchant at Christmas time who discovers something sinister happening in the local convent. This book is just many things at once. I mean, it's amazing. It's such a short book, but it's a cozy Christmas time story. It's a lesson about a dark, lesser known piece of Irish history. And it's a tale of a man who is not very rich in terms of money, but is very rich in life. So next up we have The Correspondent by Virginia Evans. This is a book about Sybil Van Antwerp, who is an elderly woman who is devoted to letter writing. The whole book is told through her letters, which is done so well. The way that information is revealed through the book is just impeccable. And Sybil is just a very imperfect yet lovable character, and she felt very real to me. She reminded me of actually some specific people in my own life. And there are also like tons of literary references because in a lot of her letters she'll mention what she's reading, and this was just a blast and very touching. So next we have Intermezzo by Sally Rooney. This tells the story of two brothers named Ivan and Peter who are grieving the loss of their father, and both of them find themselves in these age gap relationships. This is really psychological fiction, which I found is probably my favorite genre. We really get to be inside the characters' heads, and they really feel like real people. They feel complex, morally complicated, and I thought this book showed a lot of growth from Sally Rooney's previous novels. It was just a lot fleshier and kind of more satisfying to me. I will say that she takes inspiration from James Joyce, and she writes Peter's perspective as kind of a flow of consciousness, which I found kind of hard to follow at first, but then I kind of got used to it, and I actually ended up appreciating that the two brothers' voices were so distinct from each other. Next up we have Broken Country by Claire Leslie Hall. This is about a woman whose life is turned upside down when her first love moves back into town fresh from a divorce. I read this in like a day and a half, and it was just so good. It was very atmospheric. It was kind of a thriller. I don't know. You really want to find out certain information, I'll say. The writing is gorgeous. The plot's very intriguing. It kind of had similar vibes to Tom Lake by Ann Patchett, which you'll see come up soon, and also God of the Woods, which are like not very similar to each other, but somehow this book just felt like the things that were great about both of them. So next we have Do I Know You by Sadie Dingfelder. My mom actually came across this book and suggested it to me since it kind of sounded right up my alley. Shout out, Mom. Basically, a journalist discovers that she's face blind, and she goes on this journey to learn as much as she can about the condition, and she discovers a lot of other surprising things about herself along the way. I was drawn to this book because I have found that I have a little bit of trouble recognizing people myself, not as severely as the author of this book. I thought it'd be interesting to learn more about that, and I'm just generally fascinated by neurodiversity. It definitely helped me understand myself in a new way, and Sadie Dingfelder is just hilarious. She really makes the best of the challenges that she's been dealt, and she just comes across as such a good-natured person. I would love to just like get coffee with her, and I had so much fun reading this. So next up is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. This is about two families in California in kind of the late 19th, early 20th century. The families are called the Trosks and the Hamiltons, and we just get to see how their lives are intertwined. It's also inspired by the biblical story Cain and Abel. This was originally published in 1952, and it is just a satisfying novel. I can really see how this book most likely influenced more recent books that I've loved, and I'm just amazed by John Steinbeck's ability to observe. So this was written obviously at a time where you couldn't just Google things outside of your own experience. You had to go find out for yourself. You had to pay attention with your own eyes and ears. The detail with which he describes his settings and the nuance of his character's psychology is breathtaking. I mean, I think you could call this psychological fiction as well. A bit of a long one, but so worth it. Now we are moving on to the top 10, which are the books I was the most obsessed with from 2025. I'm excited. Number 10 is Missoula by Jon Krakauer. This was published in 2015, and it's about the campus rape crisis. It centers around a series of sexual assaults that happened at the University of Montana and kind of the legal processes surrounding those and the individual experiences of the victims. I read this book in like 2 days, which is kind of shocking. This book does not sound that fun from the description, but it's really written in kind of like a true crime style, and it's Definitely literary journalism at its finest. And it just made me so furious to read about what these essay survivors went through in our justice system. This just made me want to read more Jon Krakauer. Next up is a book called Fixing My Gaze by Susan Berry. This book I actually found because it was mentioned in Do I Know You by Sadie Dingfelder. This is honestly a very niche book. I don't know if everyone would be interested in it, but it has had a profound impact on me personally. It's a memoir by a woman who has compromised depth perception, which is due to her misaligned eyes, a condition known as strabismus. She knows this is the case and she figures there's nothing to be done about it. That's what most people would say, especially as an adult. And then when she's like 50, she embarks on this journey to do vision therapy with a developmental optometrist and actually gets full depth perception by the end of it. She also is a neuroscientist, so she's able to not only describe her personal experience, but also discuss it through a scientific lens in terms of what we understand about the brain and the eyes. The reason that I was so drawn to this book and got so much out of it was that I actually had the same eye condition as Susan Berry, strabismus. I was shocked to find out that there was anything that I could do to help it. And I've actually since started seeing a developmental optometrist who's actually mentioned in this book. I'm just so grateful that this book is out there, and it's just very interesting from a scientific perspective. Next up is The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by Anne Fadman. This is a nonfiction book about Leah Lee, who is a Hmong child with epilepsy. And although her condition was treatable, her outcome ended up being really tragic due to miscommunication between her Hmong family and the American doctors who were treating her. And this is really excellent literary journalism as well. A very important story. The author writes with empathy towards both the American doctors and the Hmong family, and you can really see that both parties were trying to do their best. Unfortunately, they just could not seem to understand each other. And I think this book does really important work in trying to help folks understand Hmong culture better. I randomly found this at a used bookstore. As you can see, I'm very drawn to like medical themed books, but I later discovered that it's one of my mom's and my grandma's favorite books, so that was a really cool connection to make. Next is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I think this book is kind of everywhere. It came out this year. In this book, John Green busts the myth that tuberculosis is a disease of the past. He explores the impact that it's having in a lot of different parts of the world and kind of the racialization of tuberculosis, the reasons it's still such a big problem, and he talks about the personal story of a friend of his who is a TB patient named Henry. His central thesis kind of is that tuberculosis is synonymous with social inequity. It's just really cool to see John Green using his platform to make the world a better place. It's a really unique career trajectory from YA fiction to this public health book. I also want to say that given the depth of his research and the time that he spent thinking about this topic, I think it's really impressive how succinct and accessible he managed to make this book. I think this was probably very intentional because he wanted it to have a big impact. Honestly, I bet he was tempted to write like a 500-page history, and he didn't do that. He said, I want people to actually read this and actually care about TB. That was incredible. Also, it was surprisingly funny and entertaining given the topic. I just think this was a true masterpiece. Number 6 is Playground by Richard Powers. This is a novel about the French Polynesian island of Makatea, which is fairly impoverished and is presented with the opportunity to host this new technological experiment of floating autonomous cities. And the island's residents decide to have a vote on whether or not they should be part of this venture. On the one hand, maybe they will benefit from it and really flourish, but on the other hand, maybe they will just be exploited. I would say that Richard Powers' imagination has no limits, and this book is something that truly only he could have conceived of. It is just so unique. The writing is just luscious, and the characters are so lovable. You can tell he must have spent countless hours researching oceanography, artificial intelligence, the history of Makatea. It just made me think about the world around me in a new way. And I think this was even better than the Overstory. Of course, you can see that I thought that based on how I ranked it, but this is also a new release. So I think this is an example of an author just getting better and better. Next, we have number 5, which is The Wedding People by Alison Esbach. This is about a woman who goes to a hotel following the demise of her marriage, She's actually planning to kill herself, but she soon realizes that everyone else is there for a wedding, and she scraps her original plan, spoiler, but she gets very involved in the wedding, and there's a lot of chaos that ensues. This book just sounds very light and beachy. It actually is so much more than that. I think this is the best beach vibes book I've read. It is just so funny and well crafted. And even though it's this outlandish situation, the characters felt really real to me. I also just really connected with Phoebe, the main character's experience emerging from depression, where connecting with just a few good people suddenly makes her see life in color again. It was just really beautiful and really resonated with me. I loved this. I read this very quickly. Next, we have Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. This is set on a cherry farm in 2020. A mother is recounting her old love affair with this up-and-coming movie star to her adult daughters who are all home because of the pandemic. This book was honestly perfect. It was nostalgic, it was beautifully written, the weaving in and out of different timelines was done terrifically, and the characters felt real. I just freaking loved them. The main character and her cherry farm family were just everything. This is my first Ann Patchett, and I am so excited to read more. Just stunning. Next up, we have Buckeye by Patrick Ryan. I actually found out about this book because there were ads for it on Goodreads. I decided to pre-order it because I'm from Ohio, and so I was naturally just drawn to the title, and I knew it was set in Ohio. This was historical fiction beginning right after World War I and kind of goes up to the Vietnam War. It's set in small town Ohio and tells the story of two families and the ways in which their lives are intertwined. For me, a lot of books kind of fall into one of two camps. Either there's beautiful writing or there's a good story. For example, My Year of Rest and Relaxation is beautiful writing, not much of a story. Fourth Wing is a good story, but not standout writing. And this book was just truly both. I was just hooked and I couldn't wait to find out what would be revealed next. And each individual sentence was stunning. It was also really fun to read, being from Ohio and seeing all of the Ohio references. This book was incredible. So now we're down to number 2, which is Hidden Valley Road by Robert Kolker. This is a tale of a family in which 6 of the 12 children have schizophrenia, and this is nonfiction. This family ended up contributing to genetic studies on schizophrenia. I read this book like a whole year ago, and I'm still thinking about it. It really delved into the personal side of schizophrenia, as well as existing scientific theories about the pathogenesis, like where it comes from, what causes it, and it was just chilling and really, really great literary journalism. As you'll see, that's also one of my favorite genres. A lot of my top books were literary journalism. I just love books where you're learning about something that happened in real life, but it also kind of feels like you're reading a novel because the writing is just good. This is amazing. Also, definitely a little hard to read. Very disturbing. We're down to one more book, which is my top book of 2025, and it is Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Chanel Miller is a writer who also is well known as being the victim in the Stanford rape case. I actually found this book in a little library, and I don't know, I just felt called to pick it up and read it. I believe it was published in 2019. It is just so much more than the story of being a Stanford rape victim. I mean, it not only portrays the hellscape of sexual assault in the US and like the legal system around that, but it's just a beautiful, beautiful personal memoir. Chanel Miller is just such a talented writer and a brave, thoughtful, and creative human. I just want to be her friend after reading this. A lot of the sentences in here I was just stunned by, and I just think everyone should read this. Just beautiful. Yeah, so that's it for all of the books I read in 2025. I'm already getting excited for my year of reading in 2026. If you want to let me know some of your favorite books from 2025 or what you're reading right now, feel free to leave a comment, or if you've read any of the books I talked about. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.